Transforming one thing into another. Brains into heart. A feeling into a fact. Unstructured data, there she is, into structured data. But most importantly, transforming the impossible to the possible. What that looks like, on a very personal level, is transforming a completely pedantic, nerdy, geeked out market researcher into whatever this is. And those moments of transformation from one thing to another always start with it being impossible. So today, this is going to be a love letter to my passion for data. And we're going to go through 3 different things. But first, I want to think and talk about that impossibility moment. Every time I got on a flight, in fact, just a few days ago when I flew from JFK to Dublin, I sit there for a moment in awe before we take off, looking at the 8 seats across on the giant plane that we're on. And I think about the fact that it was 123 years ago that a 12-second flight happened. In the grand scheme of time, especially as a 52-year-old, 123 years is not that much time to go from miraculously staying afloat for 12 seconds to the planes that a lot of us took this trip to get here. Now imagine myself on those fields in North Carolina in 1903, just having witnessed this 12 seconds of pure freaking magic. And if I had stopped and said, good job, could you tell me on the next flight what number of an upgrade I am? It would have been irrational. If I had said, on this next flight, are you going to be serving Woodford or Bullet? What should I get prepared for? Because one of those is unacceptable, obviously. And on this next flight, I'd like to check in my 54-pound bag, and no, I do not want to pay the additional fee for that. It would have seemed irrational and impossible that we would get to today. So what I worry about when I hear us all talking about the evolution of technology and the fear and the elements around what should and shouldn't we be doing and that constraint for how it's being done today and not being focused on tomorrow and what is going to be possible tomorrow and what we need to be preparing for tomorrow. So in that impossibility, I've spent my career as a data lover focused on loving the psychology around understanding humans for major decisions. And as it relates to that, my data neuroses comes out in the psychology of understanding people. So the 3 things that we're going to talk about today is how narcissism and avoidant attachment style have got us into thinking that we can believe the outputs of the conversational data that we see that is currently being used with generative AI. How we need a bit of madness to be able to consider what can't be done. That moment of looking at that 12 seconds and saying what else could be possible and what else should we be thinking about. And taking a step back to the Psych 101 to be able to understand how all of us are making decisions based on our own unique psychology that could inform decisions in a different way. So let's get going with that, knowing what you are talking to. There was a moment recently at a large conference in Miami, and there was a stage dedicated to artificial intelligence. And it was the most cutting edge, most advanced usage in the marketing sector. And a large major bank was up on stage demonstrating and showing off their conversational access to their data brain. So they were quite proud that they had spent the last decade combining all of the data across all business units into one place and calling that, quite confidently, a brain. And in the demonstration of how you could talk to your data, it was explaining that they had created a persona, a synthetic small business owner that was going to be able to converse with their data brain and to be able to get answers and insights for their next large strategic decision. So they opened up the portal in a chat-like feature, and they named the synthetic person Sarah. And Sarah was asking the data brain questions around what her perceptions were. So they were asking Sarah to come back and say, tell me what you think about this next campaign we're thinking about running. And Sarah had an answer. It was really robust. It shared about her thoughts and her feelings and the reasons why she would consider it and why she wouldn't consider it. They asked Sarah what her perceptions and concerns about being a small business owner were, and she confidently told them, with the air of a good narcissist. We've all met them. They have an answer, confidently, despite maybe not having the reference points or the information for that. So at the end of the talk, somebody, and it actually wasn't me, raised their hand and said, what are your data sources? And it became pretty clear that what had just happened and what was being accepted as fact was drawing from something that shouldn't be answering that type of question. It would be like sitting with your accountant and going over your taxes and understanding that he has access to a lot of data about you, right? My accountant, your accountant, knows a lot about your behavior. They know about what you've purchased. They know about the percentages. They know about how much your home costs. They know about your child's costs for tuition. But if I went to my accountant and said, I'm about to break up with my partner, do you think I should? You wouldn't expect your accountant to have an opinion about that. If you said, gosh, the other day they said to me something and I felt really uncomfortable about it, is that normal? You would not want, in this case, your accountant to give you that insight, to give you that answer. But that is what's happening. I hear the census is coming up next year in Ireland. We have until 2030 in the States. The census has a lot of data on us. But if I turned to the census taker and I said, hey, I'm thinking about rearranging my apartment and getting an interior designer, what kind of vibe do you think I should be going for? That census taker can't look at all of the data that it has on me and give me an answer. But conversational access to data is doing that today. So that bank, when asked, what sources are you pulling from, gave a really, really robust list, and they were proud. They said, all of our data. It knows everything. Heck, it's our data brain. It must know everything. So what that included was all of the behavioral data from across the entire organization. Every purchase, every click, every banner ad, who looked at it, how long they looked at it, what that purchase was, what that purchase price was. A lot of tangible, more quantitative type data. There was some social media data in there as well, typically around followers and elements around not necessarily what was being talked about, but elements, tactical, actual elements around social media, as well as some quantitative and qualitative research. And when we think about the vastness of that data brain, that sum is a dollop of sand in that, and is not influencing those answers. So transforming one thing into another, the heart from the brain. So what would it look like if we started to think about creating a data heart? And what would go into that heart that would allow that synthetic avatar, Sarah, and all of the rest of us to be able to have conversational access to talk to our data in ways that we could derive the why. So if we thought about having a data set that was not numbers, but words, and the rationale behind the irrationality of all of our human existence, we then could converse with that data set to understand some of these rationale and perceptions and whys around the decision making that we're making. But how do we get there? It's believing that what's impossible could actually be possible. And that's where I spent the friction and the tension of most of my career. As a market researcher, I was told for 25 years, you cannot quantify qualitative information. Period, full stop. I was convinced that one day we would be able to. That this binary trade-off between quantitative data, which typically comes from surveys, or the qualitative data, or that why, the rationale, the psychology of the human existence that typically comes from qualitative, that trade-off didn't have to be the case, but it had been. And we wanted to push that against the fact that it was a new day and age. When's the last time any of you spent your free time taking a survey? Probably, okay. Participate in a focus group, right? It's not what you're spending a majority of your time, and it's not sexy or interesting or connected to current day times and how all of us exist in the world today. As a Gen Xer, everything in my life has been gamified. So we're not just talking Gen Alpha or Gen Z. Everything that we do has become gamified, whether it be our Lyft app or whether it be the Wordle game that we play every day. People are spending their time in two primary ways where it's a sticky, connected engagement. One is on social media. People like to see what other people are talking about. They like to judge it. They like to be able to interact with it. And also on games. So we know that 80% of Gen Zers are playing games, but certainly all the rest of us are engaging in that gamification in one way or another. So what if we could recreate not just the type of data that we have access to and that we're talking to, but how we're gathering it in a way that actually makes sense and meets people with how they are spending their time today? And as we went down the rabbit hole of exploring what could be possible, it was at the moment where I was in my 7th year of teaching a graduate class at NYU. The class was called Global Market Research. And you could imagine on day 1 of every semester, when my graduate students walked in, they didn't expect me to be teaching them statistics. And I realized quite quickly that my students who came from across the entire globe had one thing in common. All of our educational systems taught us to not speak up unless we were sure of the answer. And in my 2nd year, it became my mission not to create the next best researcher, but to open up all of their minds to being comfortable being wrong, exploring down the different rabbit holes to be able to figure out what was right. So what we would do with this, the same thing we would do with my company, was to explore and click our way down until we realized we were wrong, but we learned a lot along the way. And then we came back out and went down the rabbit hole again. So in that moment when we were talking about how could we quantify qualitative information, we made a lot of mistakes going down those rabbit holes and exploring that comfort with exploring the impossible until we got the thing that was possible. And that happened because before generative AI came out and said, hey girl, hey, remember that day? It was a day that it happened. That then became the key to connecting the brain and the heart and understanding the why of human behavior in different ways. So here is where we ended up, and then we'll talk through what is actually happening.
shopping experience do you gravitate toward, browsing online or walking through a store? What makes it enjoyable for you? Your response has been successfully submitted. Here are the main topics that you and others came up with. Does at least one of these speak to how you are feeling? Great insight so far. Next question is up shortly.
Here's what came up. Pick all that you agree with. You mentioned you agree with this topic. How strongly do you agree with it?
Let's go deeper. Why is this a top choice for you? Here's another viewpoint on this topic from someone else in the conversation. How do you feel about it? Here's a summary of what you and others who chose the same topic said. Did we get it right?
So what was just happening there is we took what was impossible, a quantitative sample size of people. In that conversation, there was 900 people live at the same moment in time. That was fully reflective of the population we were trying to project to. Stuff that typically you could only do with a quantitative survey if you believed the right people were taking your survey in the first place, which in 2026, I ask you to question. But understand why and what's on their mind. So in this particular case, we've removed the bias of a list. So in a survey, there might be 6 or 7 different options, and we might think it's really exciting because 80% of people chose that one option. But what we don't know when we look at that 80% number is if that topic would have even come up in the top 10 if we had asked everybody what was important to them. So we flipped that. We allowed everybody to be able to tell us first what's on their mind in any way they wanted to tell us. So think about Dr. McNamara's presentation yesterday. He went and had face-to-face conversations with every person and said, tell me what's important to you about this decision. And he listened. And in that case, he needed to talk face-to-face because there was a crisis situation and people needed to be heard. And most of our business strategic decisions, they're important, I understand. We worry about and obsess about them all the time, but they're not as crucial as some of the stuff that he was talking about. So if in that moment we could have 900 people tell us in their words, natural language, what's on their mind, their feelings, and we transform that feeling into a fact, now we're doing the impossible. So what's happening here is 900 people put their answers in, and then instantly generative AI finds those themes and emerges those themes. But we know hallucination's a thing, so in case that's your question, hold off, because I can answer it, because you hopefully have other questions, is then we can say, here are the 6 themes. Maybe those were the ones that we would have come up with as experts who study this thing every single day, when the folks that we're trying to reach probably don't even think about it. So we take those 6 themes and then we put them back to the people who just told us and said, did we get this right? So we can have a validation score that you have the accuracy and assurance that this list of themes is the most important to your group of folks. Then we go into quant and say, select all, irrespective of what you just told us, tell us of these things you like the best, and now rate them. So we have all of that quantification elements, and then we can flip back and say, hey, you chose that one as most important. Can you tell me why? Which is typically a qualitative thing, to understand the why. But corporate and large organizations have never been able to trust qualitative because you can't say, hey, I talked to 12 people and they agreed on this thing. Let's go spend $30 million on this campaign. Not going to work. But now you can do that because you understand this is the why in their voice, and they tell us exactly, and they validated that that's true. So it comes up in the reporting portal. We have the percentage of their initial response, the themes, the percentages of the select all, but then we also have the rating scores, and then we have the summary of why it's important that they validated. And then we have the elements in their own words, so we can say, click on that particular theme. What do you mean that theme? I don't have to tell you what I mean by that theme. Let me tell you what your audience meant by that theme in their own words, all in under an hour. So we've kept the human component, so we've gotten rid of that synthetic data conversation, and we've completely listened to them, and they validated it, and they told us why. Turning the impossible to the possible. We also are able to differentiate the types of words and language. Of course, this seems pretty basic at this point with generative AI, across different analysis groups that are important to that decision. And then we can look at how the themes vary by the different analysis groups as well, because that's important. Staying open-minded to what's not possible today is crucial for these moments to be able to happen. All right. The psychology, I'm pretty sure that's spelled wrong. I turned this deck in at 3 a.m., not last night, but at 3 a.m. one night. And numbers are my thing. But I wanted to take a different turn and think about that psychology of messaging, of communication, that is possibly different than all of us as experts are used to thinking about and dreaming about. So I'm going to talk to you about McGuire's theory of psychological motivation. And this is similar to Myers-Briggs, only in that there are 16 different classifications. And if we understand those different 16 classifications and what motivates them to connect and think differently about a brand, whether it be to actually purchase or use that brand or just change the reputational perception about it, this is what tells us how to think about that differently. And McGuire's talks about this on 2 different planes. Do people think their way into a decision around a brand and a purchase decision, or do they feel their way into that decision? That's plane 1. Plane 2 is, are they status quo or are they growth? So you can see that all of those combine together, either cognitive, affective, status quo, growth, into 4 different clusters, each of which has a different connection to how they're making decisions. The first problem. A lot of us who are communications professionals, marketing professionals, creatives, live in Dublin, London, New York, LA, and a lot of us, including myself, are affective growth. More emotional in our decision making, and more focused on what's next, what's possible. But across Ireland, the UK, and the US, almost 50% of people are cognitive and status quo. So if we impact our bias, our internal bias around thinking people want the new thing, that people want to hear corporate speak, that people want to be able to just know it's the right thing for them, we're missing half of the population. So when we dig into each of these, we can understand what that core driver is when we understand the audience that we're talking to and speak to them in the things that matter to them. So this will matter in those brand purchase decisions when your communications are set to focus on driving purchase or revenue. But they also can be built into any other type of change or perception, is understanding that driver so we can bake it in. Stella was up here yesterday and she said, my creatives hate data. And my argument is that words are data. And if we can give you just a few words, you could still go create anything you want. I understand that restriction. I'm clearly, if you've learned nothing about me, rule following isn't necessarily my jam. But being able to understand so I can reach my objective is super, super important. So looking at this one, categorized, which is the #1 classification in the US, UK, and Ireland, it is all about something being useful and functional. And so if we're coming at this person with an emotional, future-focused message, we're going to lose them. So here's the perfect clip of how that plays out.
How can a woman possibly fight in this? Fight? We use our principles. I mean, that's how we're going to get the vote. Although I am not opposed to engaging in a bit of fisticuffs should the occasion arise.
Lovely. It's itchy. It's choking me.
Can't blame it.
Anna, where is she?
Oh, she's trying on outfit number 226.
So she came out with something that's ready to fight. It's functional, it's prepared, it's thoughtful for what she needs to do. Let's look at one more. I'm told some of you might know Parks and Recreation, but if you don't, Amy Poehler's character, the blonde, plays a small town government Parks and Recs employee, and her personality in her show as Leslie Knope is focused on her obsession with women in power, specifically political power. So she is very effective, she's very emotional, and she's focused on growth and change. But let's see how this plays out. So if we're coming to her with a message that's around, let me tell you about the data and the stats and why this thing is better than the other, we're gonna lose her. But if we understand her driver, which this moment plays out perfectly, we will be able to speak to her in the way that she's going to connect and try something new, or stay loyal if she's inclined to go away.
Hello, Mrs. Obama.
Hey, Grant, how you doing?
Doing good. This is Leslie Knope. She's considering a job with us running the new Midwest Bureau in Chicago.
Well, you know how I feel about Chicago.
Yeah, you are from Chicago, so you like it.
That's right. And we need passionate people like you in our national parks. You know, they get hundreds of millions of visitors each year. Are you nodding because you agree with me?
Yes, I do agree with you. I agree with you on all things throughout history until the end of time forever.
We all miss you very much. Oh, it's a shit show, y'all. We all know that. Okay, moving on. So the thing, so role models and celebrities, we're gonna work for someone like her. But this category is only 1% of people in Ireland, the US, and the UK. And we can get this data across other countries. This is just what I happen to have at this moment. So if we're coming at her, we could use celebrities, we could use role models. But guess what, the other 99%? It's a lot of wasted spend. Your creatives might want to know what that core message is versus spending, God only knows how much on Kim Kardashian. All right, I'm about to get kicked off, so I'm going to show you those other things. This comes out with what the creatives get in that core nugget that they need to focus on once they understand the categories of who they're trying to reach. And the impossible thing I want you to think about in your comms role is considering getting out of the silo of showing the measurement of just your division, different from marketing, different from social, different from every other element that touches external. I understand that sounds irrational and impossible, but I want you to be the ones coming up and saying, what number am I on the upgrade list? And they might look at you like you're crazy, but when we start to think about a potential holistic approach, if we could measure your brand, your organization in the totality of all of the efforts to include PR and comms in a new way where we could understand the why of connection, we could change that strategy in total because we understand each of those elements that are happening and not have it be so siloed. So if you remember nothing from me today, it's that being sure that the data knows WTF it's talking about, and you ensure what data set you're conversing with, and understanding that we can get at the why, and get more comfortable going down that rabbit hole and combining those data brains and the data hearts. I welcome your questions with 41 seconds.
That was amazing, Stefanie. I just kind of want her on speed dial, so I could... We're all mad narcissists, by the way. We knew that, didn't we? Who has some questions for Stefanie? I can't believe nobody has a question because that was... there was a lot to dig into. Who would like to ask Stefanie something?
Stefanie, that was a really interesting presentation. Going back to your online sort of market research tool, how do you select your panel
Yeah.
for that? Or do you have a sort of global panel, and by asking them questions, you can then create a sub-panel from the responses they give you? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. The same way that we still, for some reason, trust most survey data, which again, I ask you to question because there's better ways. Most of those survey responses are coming from a panel company, and there are 2 in the world that I trust, because they're staying up and ahead of all of the fraud that's possible now. And they help us recruit the population, a representative sample of the population to that particular moment in time. So it ends up, the longest part of this process is the recruiting element. So it could take 3 days if it's a general population audience, or it could take 3 weeks if we want to get like a super senior executive population. But that is the one element, but it still does happen pretty quickly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Stefanie, thank you so much. Please give it up.